Imagine the earth not as a stage set only for us, but as an ancient theatre where countless performances may have unfolded long before human beings walked upon it. We know the story of our kind, the rise of tools, of farming, of cities, of nations. But what if there were other stories? Other peoples? Other civilizations who rose quietly, thrived in their own rhythms, and then faded into silence, leaving behind little more than whispers in stone, fragments of myth, or faint shadows buried beneath mountains and seas. The earth is very old, so old that even the span of all recorded human history is but a flicker in its deep night. We measure our civilizations in thousands of years, yet the planet measures itself in billions. In such vastness, might there have been time for others to live, to create, to fall, and to vanish long before us? If so, what would they have looked like? What might they have built? And why is their memory gone? This is not a tale of proof or discovery. It is a tale of possibility, a gentle wondering, a slow exploration of what if. Tonight, we will not hurry toward answers. Instead, we will drift along the quiet currents of speculation, through deep time, through the oceans and mountains, through myths and silences, allowing our minds to imagine civilizations that may have been before us, and perhaps civilizations that may yet come after US.SO settle in. Let the room grow quiet, let your breathing slow, and allow yourself to rest as we step softly into the forgotten corridors of time. Whether you listen with curiosity or simply with tired eyes ready for sleep, you are welcome here, and before we begin, if you find comfort in these long, calm journeys into history and imagination, I invite you to subscribe to Boring History for Sleep. By doing so, you'll always have a quiet companion waiting when you need to drift into rest. Together, we can wander gently through the mysteries of the past, learning and dreaming in peace. When we imagine the past, we often picture it as a museum, neat corridors of time, bones arranged in order, labels certain, glass polished and bright. But Earth's true archive is nothing like a museum. It is a vast, breathing library built of sand and mud, of pressure and chemistry, of heat and water and chance. Its shelves tilt. Its books dissolve. Its pages are rebound into mountains, unbound into grains, folded, burned, swallowed, and sometimes, mercifully, laid flat where careful eyes may read a paragraph before the wind turns the page. The fossil record is not a catalogue. It is a whispering. Fossils themselves are small miracles. Bone must be buried quickly, sheltered from scavengers and the jaws of bacteria, kept from the tooth of oxygen and the dissolving tongue of rain. Soft tissues demand even kinder luck, preserved only in rare places where time slows, fine silts, anoxic waters, amber's golden hold. Even hard shells prefer certain chemistries, a particular pH, the right ions drifting by to trade places with original minerals, replacing one lattice with another until what was once shell becomes stone shaped like shell. For every fossil that survives, countless bodies feed the sea, the soil, the currents of life that follow. This bias is the first shadow. We see what is more likely to be saved, creatures with hard parts, beings that lived in watery places where sediments fall like quiet snow, beings that died in moments that gave burial as a gift, mudslides, sudden floods, ash that settled like a blanket. Forests on windy heights vanish into leaf mulch and loam, then into nothing our fingertips can read. Plains where herds roamed become rivers' luggage, carried far and crushed fine. Civilizations, if they were delicate or sparse or fond of wood and cloth and leather, would be almost invisible in such a book. How many lullabies sung under trees leave their mark in stone? Taphonomy is the scholarship of such vanishings, the study of how remains pass from life into record, and how that passage edits the story. It teaches that death is not enough. Burial matters, chemistry matters, time matters in peculiar ways. A bone that rests in porous sand breathes and dissolves. A bone tucked under clay can trade itself for stone grain by grain. A carcass left on a floodplain may be scattered into 1,000 notes. A carcass left in a quiet lagoon may become a chord sustained for eons. Even here, luck is not the only author. The angle of a hillside, the vigor of a season's rain, the appetite of beetles, each holds a pen. Sometimes the earth is generous beyond reason. In certain rare places, Lagerstätten, the treasure chests of time, soft bodies are kept with improbable tenderness. Here we find the ghost of a fin, the outline of a feather, the fur on a mammal's cheek, the shadow of a jellyfish that otherwise would be only rumor. Such deposits remind us of how much is lost elsewhere. If in one lagoon we see a world's fine details, imagine the unwritten chapters wherever conditions were less kind. The fossil record, by showing what it can keep, confesses what it cannot. Strata are the lines of this script, but they are not continuous. Unconformities interrupt. Missing chapters where erosion ate pages, where deposition paused, where a region lifted into sun and wind and then later sank again beneath the quiet hand of sediment. We may read and then. Where something grand once stood, but the ellipsis is made of rock and silence. A canyon wall can show bands of color like a stack of centuries, but above and below an unconformity the colors change abruptly, and the stone shrugs when asked what happened between. What would a civilization look like when translated through such abruptness? A thin seam of ash? A strange chemistry? Or nothing at all, if the page was torn out before the ink dried? Heat, too, is an editor. Diagenesis, the chemical maturing of sediments, turns mud to shale, sand to sandstone, limy ooze to limestone. Metamorphism presses and warms and folds until original fossils blur, recrystallize, or vanish into new fabrics of mineral. Subduction swallows entire ocean floors. Continents collide and crumple them upward into mountain belts where gneiss and schist smile politely at our questions. Deep time is not a closet where old clothes hang. It is a loom that reweaves the cloth into something new. If an old pattern once existed, be it a reef or a road, the loom does not promise to spare it. There are, however, whispers more delicate than bone, microfossils and pollen. Grains of pollen, tough as tiny shields, settle into lake bottoms year by year like an annual signature. Drill a core, and the layers read as a pulse of plant communities. First pine, then oak, a surge of grasses, a strange decline, a recovery. Diatoms, foraminifera, carcoliths, minute shells of living plankton, snow into seafloors and tell of waters that were warm or cold, rich or spare, old or new. These are not portraits. They are atmospheres, the scent of a room after the guests have left. If any civilization, ours or another, reshaped forests, burned prairies, dammed rivers, planted fields, their signature might linger in such grains and shells as a subtle rhythm, charcoal pulses, sudden dominance of a plant that likes human company. A shift in mud chemistry, isotopes also murmur. Carbon, nitrogen, sulfur, they occur in flavors that vary with habits and environments. Fields cleared by fire can change the isotopic language of soil. Oceans choked by blooms speak differently in sulfur. The breath of countless hearths might nudge the balance of carbon in tree rings or ice. Geology reads these accents carefully, acknowledging that volcanoes, currents, and the slow tilt of Earth's axis are also eloquent speakers. If others once warmed their rooms, cooked their food, fired their clay, perhaps their warmth would translate into a fleeting isotope aside. But even these notes fade in upheavals, are smeared by floods, are overwritten by glacier. Deep time is a palimpsest, new ink, old parchment, words haunting words. The senior lips effect, a gentle reminder from paleontology, says that the last fossil we find is almost never the last member to live. Extinction looks sudden in stone because chance thins the record. Populations dwindle long before their final bones are saved. Likewise, the first fossil is rarely the true beginning. Origins are older than their earliest mention. Apply this to civilizations, and our ignorance grows appropriately humble. If a culture rose and fell in 1,000 years on some forgotten coast, what are the odds that its first and last traces align pleasantly with the few windows we have opened? It is not that such a thing surely happened. It is that the record is not designed to rule it out. There is also the matter of scale. A great whale's bones can become a reef for decades. A mouse disappears overnight. If an earlier civilization was small in number, light on the land, migratory, or deeply sustainable, burning little, piling little, burying little, its signature would be small by design. We are trained, by our own habits, to seek mountains of debris, walls of stone, mines in cross-section. But a civilization could be woven instead from things that choose vanishing: wood and sinew, thatch and hide, baskets and songs, and paths that evaporate back into grass. Such a people would be remembered best by living creatures that changed in their company, plants that learned to thrive near campfires, animals that grew tamer at the edge of villages, blackberries that spread along the lines where hedges once stood. In deep time, even these subtleties are swept and redrawn. Now and then, geology reveals time capsule places that resist change. A cave whose entrance collapsed and sealed its interior like a jar. A peat bog that turned offerings into dark, leathery continuations of themselves. A desert basin where evaporation left salt crusts that discouraged burrowers and rot. In such pockets, even footprints persist, each toe and heel pressed into the ground like a signature. The record here is intimate: pollen on feathers, a beetle's wing case still iridescent, a woven mat ghosting the pattern of its fibers into the sediment. We see such wonders in the human record of mere tens of thousands of years. Their analogues in million-year spans are rarer, thinner, and often severed from the context that made them legible. A footprint without a footnote. Consider also the tide of discovery. What we know of the fossil record is partly a map of where we have looked: river cuts and road cuts, quarries and cliffs, mines and arid basins where rock is naked to the sun. Beneath forests, beneath cities, beneath oceans and ice, the pages remain bound. Each year opens a few new lines. A farmer finds a bone in a field. A storm reveals a layer in a cliff. A drill core from the sea brings up a story in silt. The record is not only biased by process, it is biased by attention. Silence, sometimes, is simply a place we have not yet learned how to listen. But silence can also be a structure, not a void. The pattern of absences can tell us what the earth tends to keep and what it tends to discard. When we see a sequence rich in shells but poor in leaves, we learn about a shoreline. When we find charcoal pulses without corresponding lava, burns without eruptions, we consider lightning and weather, and perhaps, in younger chapters, the hands of people. In still younger chapters, plastics, concrete, and metals shout their presence. Their voice is unmistakable. In the oldest, the vocabulary shrinks to minerals, to grains, to isotopes and textures. If there were speakers there, they spoke softly, or they spoke in materials the earth prefers to forget. It is tempting to one's certainty, to stand in a cave, hold a shard, and say with confidence, "Here they were." And sometimes, with our own species, we can. A hearth ringed with stones, pigments on a wall, a bone carved where function gives way to ornament. These anchor our kind in the long gallery of time. But our question tonight is a gentler one. We are not prosecuting a case. We are listening for footsteps in a house where carpets are deep and doors stick. The fossil record is not withholding evidence. It is speaking in its natural volume. We lower our voices to match. If no prior civilization ever lived. The record we have makes perfect sense, a planet of ceaseless change. A chorus of life that swells and fades and swells again. A library of shells and bones distributed where chance allowed. If, by contrast, something briefly organized itself into the shape of a civilization and then dispersed, we can say only that the earth has had ample means to smooth its traces. Either way, the lesson is the same. We are visitors in a house of stone whose walls are very old and very busy, so we take comfort in the shadows. They are not failures of knowledge, but the natural shade cast by mountains of time. We learn to read their edges, a dark band here that means fire, a sudden change in shells that means sea, a tilt that means an ancient breath of the crust beneath our feet. The rest we render in humility and imagination. Silence becomes not a lack but a landscape, one in which wonder can walk without tripping over certainty, and if, while walking there, we sometimes feel the odd tingle that says we are not alone, not in the present, but in the long company of life, let that feeling be a kindness. Let it soften us. For whether the fossil record keeps our stories or returns them to dust, the patience that holds its pages together is the same patience we need to live well, steady, attentive, content to learn what is given and to leave the rest in peace. Before there are cities, there are hands. Before there are histories set in ink, there are gestures repeated until they become knowledge. Long before a story is written, a tool is lifted. It is tempting to think of civilization as palaces, markets, and laws, but beneath those things lie quieter foundations, the decision to shape a flake instead of a pebble, the patience to grind an edge, the discovery that fire, when courted, will stay. If we wonder whether anything like civilization once rose before us, we might look not first for monuments, but for the smallest agreements between mind and matter, tools and flames, the first alliances stone remembers. It takes an edge and keeps it. It takes a blow and tells you, with its fracture, whether the strike was true. Imagine a shoreline of long ago, gulls calling, tide breathing in and out. A hand picks up a cobble, tests its weight, and brings it smartly against another. A spark of white at the break, a tick of glassy chert, a sliver with a glittering lip, a flake, then another, then a rhythm. Soon there is a cutting edge, as precise as the wrist is steady. In such moments, the world becomes more obedient. Fibers separate, hides yield, reeds split, wood shapes. A meal is prepared, a shelter mended, a cord tightened. The first technology is not loud. It is intimate, one hand, one edge, one problem solved. There is a grammar to stone. Some rocks cleave conchoidally, shells of fracture curving under the surface. Some crumble like bread and refuse to hold an angle. Some are too stubborn to persuade. Hands learn this by touch and by failure. A platform is prepared. A blow is set at just so. The bulb of percussion swells like a signature below the scar. A novice lights the sky with sparks and shards. A practiced napper coaxes a clean, long flake. The act is small, but in its repetition an apprenticeship emerges, the passing of a skill from morning to evening, from season to season, perhaps from one generation to the next. In that passing, the seed of culture is visible, a craft that outlives a single pair of hands that if there were ages older than our own, eras whose people left scant record, their most durable traces might not be towers but edges. Yet even edges are perishable when time lengthens. A shoreline lifts and lowers. Frost heaves and grinds. Rivers carry pebbles to the sea. Mountains are chewed down to plains. What today we treat as an artifact, tomorrow becomes gravel. And what is thrown into the ocean rarely returns as it was. Salt and tide and pressure remake everything into their native alphabet of sand. The smaller the tool, the easier it is to lose in the pages of stone. Beyond edge lies polish, a quieter mastery. A grindstone turns roughness into function. Bone slips into smoothness and becomes a needle. Antler hardens into a barb point. A plank receives the patience of abrasion and reveals, at last, a gleam. Polishing is a promise that time can be invested in a single object long enough to change its nature, a promise of surplus minutes, surplus calories, and thus of a life slightly less perilous. A polished surface is an early luxury, and luxuries, however modest, whisper of communities. Then there is fire. Fire is not found, it is kept. A lightning-struck tree can be a gift, but a gift ends when the branch smoulders to ash. The true step is the decision to carry coals, to nurse embers, to wake a spark that slept under yesterday's blanket of ash. A hearth is a circle of stones that says, "Here we are, and here we will be again." It shortens night and extends day. It warms hands and softens roots. It tames meat and hardens points. It drives insects from the doorway. It makes a room from air. It is the first negotiator between cold world and warm body, and the first workshop. Once fire is kept, it is taught to work. Clay at the edge of a creek is rolled, pinched, and left to dry. The sun offers a vessel that will fail if it meets water too soon. But turn the clay near the coals, then nearer still, and changes begin. The soft ring becomes a harder sound, the color deepens, a smell like earth and rain rises. The first fired pot is as much a thought as a thing, proof that heat can be a toolmaker. If there were makers before us, perhaps their pots are now silt, their kilns are now ridges, yet the idea remains vivid, that someone learned to convert mud into memory, fire expands patience into culture. With it, resins soften into glue, wood bends into boughs, pitch seals seams against water. Food transforms, grains that were stubborn become tender, roots that bit the tongue become sweet, bones surrender broth and marrow. The hearth becomes a classroom, one person tending, another shaping, someone else telling. Songs learn to sit close by flame. Stories find their first ceilings on smoke-dark beams. A village is a circle of such circles. Every technology multiplies itself. The first cord wins into net and sling. The net brings fish. The sling secures birds. Feathers decorate arrows that carry stone edges farther than arms alone. A digging stick finds a root. A hoe finds a field. A basket holds a harvest. A storehouse holds a winter. A calendar begins, not yet of paper, but of habit. The day to set traps, the time to burn stubble, the week when the river runs clear. If we search for civilizations past the reach of parchment, it may be these networks of habit that we miss most, the intangible web of when and how that leaves only faded hints in pollen, and ash is a quiet archivist. A layer in a bank remembers a fire that was not lightning. Charcoal tucked in a seam tells of a night that smoked and sang. If we look in the deep pages of earth and find such thin black lines, years of fuel gathered, seasons of flames tended, we might be reading diaries written in soot. Yet the diary is fragile. A flood smears it. A burrowing root breaks the sentence. A mountain's uplift folds the page until the script is turned upside down. Over millions of years, diaries become riddles, then smudges, then simply darker grains in a road-cut wall that we also dream in metal. And it is metal that tempts us to ask about civilizations we cannot see. Smelting is an argument with stone that the stone only sometimes allows us to win. It demands controlled heat, the right breath of air, a patient sequence of steps. If an old age learned this language and then lost it, what would remain after long weather? A bloomery becomes rubble. A slag heap becomes a hill. A knife returns to ore. A nail becomes a stain in damp clay. In places where the earth has turned itself many times, even such stains are folded and scattered. The older a craft, the lonelier its traces. But perhaps the signature of making is not only matter, it is also organization. A path trodden into the ground and tended. A grove pruned into a pattern of shade and fruit. A burn scar at the forest's edge repeated each spring to bring green quickly for grazing animals. These are technologies that rarely leave monuments. They leave, instead, patterns in living things. If we ever read an ancient civilization in a place where bones and bricks are gone, it might be through ghostly changes in pollen records, through the sudden abundance of a plant that liked human company, or through the rhythm of charcoal that pulses across centuries like breath. Even these, in deep time, are overwritten by glacier and seas. We may ask, what makes a civilization? Is it a city? A script? A treaty? Or is it the quiet compounding of small competencies, 1,000 ways to make, mend, share, and remember? If the latter, then the line between people and civilization softens. A camp with a hearth and a story is perhaps the first suburb of a future city. A tool passed from parent to child is perhaps the earliest archive. A tune hummed while grinding grain is a kind of opera. In this view, civilizations do not suddenly appear. They condense, like dew, bead by bead, along the edges of daily life. What if such condensation happened long before us, and then evaporated again? The evidence we would seek is humble, repeated hearths. Clusters of edgework where hands sat season after season to shape the day's tools. Stones lifted to hold windbreaks. Clay altered by controlled heat. Bones bearing the tidy, consistent marks of knives. Sediments layered like quilts by the same choices made in the same places. And yet the earth is a patient housekeeper. It tidies. It puts things away. Given enough rain, enough frost, enough folding of its own crust, the house looks new again. A guest arriving late would swear no one had ever lived there at all. Still, the imagination lingers over certain possibilities, that in some lucky basin, under an old lake, that in a cave whose roof never let in a drop, that in silt where oxygen never dared, that in amber dunes that discouraged roots, some pocket of earlier hands remains, not to declare a triumph of discovery, but to humanize time, to feel that others, not unlike us in their need for warmth and water and tenderness, learn to make life more compliant by courting stone and flame, and even if the shelves of time yield no such pocket, the lesson remains. Civilizations, including ours, are towers built of small choices. A better edge so that food can be prepared more cleanly. A kind of flame so that smoke leaves and warmth stays. A container that turns scarcity into surplus. A habit that repeats until it becomes custom, then culture, then heritage. The grand palaces and libraries arrive later. They rest upon the first flake, the first ember that did not go out. So when we ask if anyone came before, we are also asking about ourselves. What, among our own makings, is truly durable? Which of our gestures will read, to distant eyes, as the beginning of something, and which will pass like waves on sand? Perhaps the humblest will last longest, the outline of a hearth, the polish of a threshold stone, the charcoal that still stains a fingertip after 10,000 years. These are the dream's foundations, the quiet bargain hands strike with matter and fire. Repeated until the bargain becomes a life, and in the quiet, we listen, the tap of a hammerstone, the soft exhale of bellows, the susurrus of a whetstone, the sigh of kindling catching. These are the instruments of an orchestra that does not need a hall. If others once played them before us, if they learned the same chords of necessity and patience, the music is gone now. But the score is familiar, for it is the one we still read each morning when we decide to remake the world fit gently under our hands. Stones do not hurry, and perhaps that is why we turn to them when we wonder about ages we cannot see. Wood rots, cloth frays, stories wander from tongue to tongue and change along the way, but stone lingers, weathered, patient, often stubbornly present. Across the world, from windswept moors to tropical lagoons, we find stones lifted, set, and arranged by hands that lived long before our names began. We call them circles, avenues, cromlechs, dolmens, menhirs, each a different posture of rock, each a syllable in a language we almost remember. Walk, in your mind, among a ring of uprights where the grass presses softly against your boots. The stones are not smooth. They hold the small histories of lichen and frost, of centuries of rain tapping lightly at their faces. Some lean a little. Some have toppled and lie like sleeping animals in the field. Birds perch on them and look around as though the stones were cliffs. The wind moves through, making a sound the stones do not answer. Whatever the builders meant, the circle keeps its silence. And yet it speaks, to us, of patience, alignment, gathering, attention elsewhere. Great slabs rest upon others, table-like, entrances to chambers whose ceilings have carried winter after winter without complaint. In other places, long rows of stones step across the earth. They seem like processions halted mid-journey, or the ribs of an old ship abandoned to meadow. There are platforms of fitted blocks where the seams are so neat a knife-edge struggles to find a shadow. There are terraced hills whose bones show through under-thin soil. There are straight lines that meet the horizon as if answering a question we have not learned to ask. We have names, circles on the plain, avenues in the mist, alignments near surf and heather, temple mounds whose stairways feel like measured breathing. We have places where basalt pillars rise from the sea as if the earth had taught itself to play at architecture, and places where coral and stone interweave into islets patterned like chessboards. We have deserts where stones point toward solstices, and high altitudes where stonework hugs foothills and sits with its back against mountains. Each culture, each climate, each toolkit shaped its own arrangements, and yet, when we step back, an echo runs through them all. Lift this. Turn it. Face it toward light. Mark this day. Remember, theories come and go like seasons. Calendars in stone, shrines to the sky, markers of land and lineage, places for the dead, places for those not yet born, perhaps all of these at once. The longer we look, the more we find that purpose, like shadow, moves with the sun. An alignment might hold sunrise in June and also the moon's high stand in a year most of us will not count. A chamber might cradle sound so that a chant grows large enough to press gently against the ribs. A platform might be less a stage for spectacle than a table for offerings of grain, or flowers, or the simple act of gathering. But there is another kind of wondering that stones invite, the sense that they might be palimpsests. A site begins as one thing, an earthwork, a circle of small uprights, and then, over centuries, is revised. Stones are moved, replaced, enlarged. A ditch becomes a bank. Wood posts make way for rock. A conquest changes rights. A drought changes priorities. A migration brings new stories that need new shapes. Layers accumulate. What we see now may be the last draft of a long, quiet conversation. If so, how many beginnings lie buried under every conclusion? How many hands, how many minds, participated in the slow authorship of these places? When we speak of civilizations that might have come before us, before our histories learned to write, the stones stand with a particular kind of authority. Not because they prove anything grand, but because they prove that memory can be made out of matter. Even if we know who raised a given ring or terrace, the stones also whisper about the possibility of making and remaking, of building upon older sites whose meanings had already grown soft with time. A village might turn an ancestor's field into a sanctuary. A sanctuary might be later quarried for a wall. A wall might be buried by a flood, and centuries later someone might raise a new marker directly above it, sensing a place that still hummed with old intention. Layer answers layer. Memory answers memory. Myths, too, seem to keep such layers. In one valley, people tell of giants who carried stones like pebbles and set them down in careful rows. In another, a goddess rests beneath a hill and breathes through passageways that align with stars. In coastal places, fishermen speak of drowned avenues whose tips still catch sunlight at low tide, where once the ancestors walked on festival days. These stories contradict each other in detail yet agree in a feeling that stones are not only heavy, they are meaningful. That arranging them is a way of conversing with sky, season, and time. Archaeology, patient and precise, offers us dates and sequences that anchor wonder to soil. A trench tells of a hearth here, a post hole there. Pollen in peat whispers of climates that favoured oak, then birch. A flint flake says this edge was shaped by a careful wrist. These are gifts of knowledge, and they do not diminish the stone's poetry. They escort it. Even when we can say with some certainty who lifted a given lintel, we still feel what the stones are willing to share. That memory wishes to be held somewhere. And stone holds well. Speculation asks its gentler question beside these facts. If stone remembers so sturdily, what of the things that do not? Timber leaves only dark arcs in soil. Cloth disappears into the appetite of bacteria and time. Leather returns to earth. Even brick weathers and becomes a kind of sand. If there were ages older than our oldest texts, crafts, customs, gatherings, how much could possibly endure? Perhaps only the heaviest gestures, a platform on a ridge, a line of uprights on a moor, a mound whose outline keeps its shape even when its purpose is forgotten, and even if there were nothing before, no unknown civilization, no lost chapter, these stones still perform a miracle for us. They slow us. They ask us to step carefully, to be quiet, to let mind and breath find a slower gear. In that pace, we begin to hear things not said so much as suggested, that people, long before our calendars, watched the same sun lift and lower, that they loved enough to gather, that they cared to mark a day so it would not slip entirely into the river of time. This is the oldest heritage, attention. The stones have it, and by visiting, we borrow some for ourselves, so we keep returning to them, in person or in thought. We trace their surfaces with fingertips, or we picture them in the soft light of morning. We note the curve of an arc against distant hills, the way a lintel makes a door through which sky walks, the way a row of stones turns into a sentence when you read it while the wind is low. We do not require them to confess their secrets. We only ask them to remind us that meaning can outlast explanation. And they do, whether these monuments are final drafts of one era or edits of many. Whether they stand atop older meanings now in dust. Whether they are simply what they are, stones lifted by neighbors who wanted a place to meet the sun, they remain our teachers. They show how memory can be made tangible, how silence can be filled without noise, how the past can be present without insisting on itself, and if, someday, scholars find another layer beneath, older post holes, a deeper bank, a foundation turned at a different angle, perhaps we will feel that gentle thrill again, that we have not reached the bottom of the page, that history has more to say, that stones, in their quiet way, are still speaking. Sand is one of time's gentlest disguises. Grain by grain, it drifts, falls, and piles, covering what lies below. Unlike stone, it does not crush quickly. Unlike sea, it does not dissolve swiftly. It buries, it protects, it hides. Across deserts, the wind has lifted mountains into motion, carving and reshaping, sweeping dust across horizons until the very landscape seems like a tide, frozen and flowing at once. In that tide, whole worlds may be waiting, hidden beneath dunes as though sleeping under blankets of gold. We know already of cities covered by sand. Temples in Egypt once lay buried to their lintels, uncovered only when explorers brushed away centuries of drifting dust. The city of Ubar, the Atlantis of the sands, lingered in myth until satellite eyes revealed the old caravan routes converging on its remains. Palmyra, Petra, Timbuktu, all were once half swallowed, their facades peeking from dunes like the bones of old beasts. In each case, the desert was both a destroyer and a preserver. What it takes from the eye, it gives back in protection, sealing walls and scripts against rain and rot. If such is true for a few thousand years, what of 10,000? 100,000? 1,000,000? Could there be places where civilizations, known or unknown, sleep in chambers of dust, their stones intact, their streets preserved beneath shifting hills? The desert's silence makes the idea possible. Unlike jungles, which devour with roots and moisture, sand desiccates and guards. Wood desiccates into brittle forms, leather stiffens, parchment becomes fragile but not erased. Clay and stone, once buried, may lie unchanged for millennia. The desert's vastness compounds this mystery. The Sahara alone stretches wider than the continental United States. Once, it was green. Lakes dotted its basins, rivers ran, animals grazed, and humans painted scenes of hippos and giraffes on cave walls now surrounded by endless sand. That change occurred not millions but only thousands of years ago. The land's memory is short, its transformation sudden. What might lie beneath dunes older still? What valleys, what villages, what forgotten lives? Archaeologists sometimes speak of Aeolian archives, records kept by the wind. Beneath dunes, stratified layers of sand preserve not only pollen and charcoal but sometimes traces of hearths, shards of pottery, post holes of vanished homes. A single excavation may reveal a time when people camped, cooked, and carved, then left, only for the desert to cover the site and keep it in darkness until uncovered again. These are small civilizations within civilizations, hints of human endurance. And if humans, why not others, if others ever were? Even myths from desert peoples often speak of buried cities, tales of cursed kingdoms swallowed overnight by storms of sand, legends of travelers stumbling upon columns in the wasteland, only to lose them again in shifting winds. These stories, repeated in Arabia, in Africa, in the Americas, carry a similar echo. The desert does not erase, it conceals. To walk across dunes is to walk across graves of memory, yet sand is also restless. The same dunes that preserve can also shift, exposing, scattering, burying again. A wall that survives intact for centuries may collapse in an afternoon storm. A carving exposed by wind may wither into shapelessness within a decade. Sand is not a permanent keeper. It is a patient gambler, covering and uncovering as it pleases. If older civilizations ever existed, the desert may have rolled over them many times, offering glimpses and then withdrawing them back into silence. The imagination lingers on the thought, somewhere beneath Sahara's waves of dunes. Perhaps far below, lie stones carved in hands older than ours. Or in the Gobi, the Kalahari, the Arabian empty quarter, regions so wide, so silent, that even modern satellites cannot pierce every fold. The desert is both map and eraser, holding secrets with the same hand that scrawls. New dunes each morning, but perhaps the most important truth is not whether cities are buried there. It is the reminder that the earth itself is an archivist with many methods. Stone crushes, sea dissolves, forest consumes, but sand hides. It hides so well that even within our own span of history, it has fooled us many times, only to surprise us with temples, tombs, and cities once thought lost forever. To listen to the desert is to hear its hush, a soundless promise that memory may not be gone, only waiting. And in that hush, the thought remains, what if more than we know sleeps beneath the dunes, waiting for the slow patience of wind to reveal it? If the land is a library of stone and sand, then the ocean floor is an archive written in silt. Year after year, tiny particles drift downward, shells of plankton, dust from deserts, ash from volcanoes, even the faint residue of meteors burning in the sky. All of it settles, layer by layer, into the quiet darkness below. Unlike the shifting surfaces of mountains and forests, the seabed is steady in its patience, an enormous storehouse of memory. There, in the deep, oxygen is scarce, currents are weak, and life moves slowly. A footprint on land may vanish in a day, but in certain basins beneath the sea, an imprint can last for millennia, even millions of years. Fish bones, pollen grains, chemical traces, these gather into thin lines, each a page in a book written without words. To drill a core from such depths is to pull up a time machine, mud that tells of ancient climates, plankton that record the warmth or chill of waters, dust that remembers winds and deserts long gone. If civilizations once stood before us, and if their traces were carried into rivers and seas, then the ocean floor may hold their final echoes. A broken shard of ceramic, tumbled smooth by currents, could lie buried beside the shells of foraminifera. A trace of altered chemistry, a sudden pulse of metal, a shift in carbon, could mark fires or forges or fields tended by vanished hands. The ocean does not erase all. It buries, it compacts, it holds. And yet the ocean is not always kind. Much of its floor is born not of patience but of fire. At the mid-ocean ridges, new crust spreads, molten rock cooling as it emerges. In the trenches, old crust dives back into the mantle, carrying with it sediments, fossils, and all that rested upon them. The cycle is steady, consuming and renewing. In geologic time, most of the ocean floor is young, rarely older than 200 million years. What came before is swallowed, folded back into Earth's inner silence. If there were civilizations upon coasts older than this, their traces may now lie deep within stone, lost to human eyes forever. Still, some parts of the ocean guard their secrets longer. In places where subduction is slow or absent, where basins have lain quiet for long spans, sediments build thick, miles deep. These layers are dense with time, thin bands for each year, thicker swaths for storms and floods, ash for eruptions, dark seams for times when oceans ran short of breath and life withered. They are patient accumulations, a ledger written in chemistry, texture, and color. Within them, the faintest anomalies, a sudden enrichment of a rare metal. A curious spike of soot can stand out like punctuation in an otherwise steady script. When scientists read these records, they sometimes find surprises, sudden changes in carbon that suggest massive burning, spikes of iridium that hint at cosmic impacts, shifts in sulfur that tell of oceans gone briefly toxic. Each anomaly has its cause: asteroids, volcanoes, extinctions. Yet the mind wonders, what if some strange pattern, some unexplained pulse, were the quiet echo of something not yet imagined? If there were civilizations before us, the seabed might hold their obituary in a few centimeters of mud. But even if no such traces exist, the ocean floor teaches us humility. It reminds us that history is not just kings and wars, but climates and currents, dust and ash. The archive below the waves is not written for us, yet it is legible if we learn the language of isotopes and microfossils. It tells us that Earth remembers differently than we do. We hold memory in paper and stories. The planet holds it in sediment and chemistry, and perhaps there is comfort in this. If we, too, someday vanish, the ocean will take our traces. Plastic fragments, chemical shifts, alloys, and concretes. They will drift down, layer upon layer, joining the patient silt. 100 million years from now, perhaps nothing of us will remain but a faint, unusual line in the seabed, an odd whisper in the archive of mud. The ocean floor does not shout. It murmurs. And in those murmurs, we hear not certainty but possibility. To listen is to imagine worlds that may have risen and fallen before ours, their memory pressed into silt, kept in silence, waiting in darkness. Time is not only a measure. It is a sculptor. With patient hands, it shapes mountains, carves valleys, and smooths stone. Its touch is so slow we often do not notice, yet its persistence is absolute. Nothing, no matter how grand, escapes its work. Temples, towers, forests, bones, all are softened, all are erased. To imagine civilizations before us is to imagine not only their rise, but their vanishing beneath this steady hand of time. Consider a monument of stone. In a few hundred years, its edges grow weathered. In 1,000, cracks appear, water seeps, frost expands, and blocks tumble. In 10,000 years, sands bury it, trees root into it, winds grind its carvings into faint shadows. In 100,000 years, the monument is rubble, indistinguishable from boulders in a field. By 1,000,000 years, even the rubble may be gone, drawn into rivers, ground to sand, lifted into new stone. The monument that once stood proud becomes part of the earth's quiet face. Forests, too, are erased. Trees fall, rot, and return to soil. Fires consume them, floods carry them away. Unless preserved in rare conditions, amber, peat, permafrost, their memory is short. Animals vanish likewise, their bones scattered, chewed, dissolved. Only under the gentlest of circumstances do fossils remain, and even those fade under the press of deeper time. Civilizations, if they lived long ago, would face the same fate. Their tools would rust, their homes crumble, their paths blur into meadows. Fire would turn wood to ash. Rain would carry ash to rivers. Rivers would scatter it into seas. In places, traces might last, a shard in clay, a footprint in stone, but time is tireless. Even those rare survivors would eventually fold into Earth's shifting crust, their stories erased. Geologists speak of deep time as though it were an abyss, and in some ways it is. Imagine standing in a canyon wall of layered stone. Each band tells of an ancient sea, a vanished desert, a floodplain where rivers once meandered. Yet for every band we see, countless others have been worn away. The record is partial, broken, scattered. What remains is less a book than a collection of saved fragments, letters from chapters mostly lost. The slow erasure of time is thorough, but it is also selective. It keeps only what chance allows. Erosion, wind, water, fire, ice, all work as editors. They cross out details, shorten stories, and sometimes remove entire pages. Yet this editing is not cruel. It is simply the Earth's way. Nothing is kept forever. Nothing is wasted. Matter is recycled, reshaped, reborn. The marble that once formed a temple might become limestone again, then soil, then perhaps another stone in a future monument. Memory is not destroyed. It is transformed until it no longer resembles what it once was. And so, when we ask what if civilizations came before, we must accept that time itself may have erased them. Not out of malice, but out of endless patience. Even our own works will not endure forever. Our buildings, our machines, our books, all will one day be softened by rain and wind. Perhaps, millions of years hence, only a faint chemical line will remain, a subtle layer in stone saying, something was here, but there is beauty in this erasure. It reminds us that permanence is an illusion, that all things belong to the greater cycle. What vanishes in one form appears in another. Dust rises, settles, and becomes part of new landscapes. The slow erasure of time is also a kind of renewal. What we lose, the earth reshapes. What fades, the earth remembers differently. To sit quietly with this thought is not to despair but to find peace. For if we, too, will one day be forgotten, then our task is not to cling to permanence but to live gently, knowing that time will carry us into new forms. Perhaps others came before us. Perhaps we are the first. Either way, the slow erasure of time will one day fold our story into its patient silence. When we think of civilizations, we imagine monuments, pyramids, palaces, libraries, roads stretching over horizons. Yet most of what makes a civilization is softer: wood, cloth, clay, words, songs, gestures. These things vanish quickly. Even great works, when left untended, collapse with surprising speed. Roofs leak, walls crumble, beams rot. In 100 years, a city can turn to ruin. In 1,000, its stones are scattered. In 1,000,000, even its ruins may be gone. So how does a civilization vanish without a trace? The answer lies not in one grand catastrophe, but in many quiet erasures. Climate shifts. A drought stretches for decades, rivers shrink, fields fail. A people move on, leaving behind villages that the desert slowly swallows. Forests reclaim farmland, trees sprouting between stones until walls tumble. A flood can do the same, burying homes in silt, changing the course of rivers so that whole regions are abandoned. In time, nothing remains but faint soil marks, invisible without careful study. Materials decay. Imagine a civilization that relied not on stone but on wood, reeds, mud brick. In humid forests, wood rots quickly. In wetlands, reeds dissolve. Mud brick, once exposed to rain, melts into lumps that blend with the soil. Within a few centuries, such buildings are gone, leaving behind only irregular patterns in the earth. Without stone, without metals, their memory fades swiftly. Fire consumes. A great city can burn in a single night. Roofs collapse, libraries turn to ash, pottery cracks in the heat. Unless buried and sealed, the ash is scattered, washed away by rain, carried into rivers, diluted until nothing remains. Fire is both preserver and destroyer. It can harden clay, but it also erases paper, cloth, and wood, leaving only silence. Oceans rise. Coasts are vulnerable. A slow rising of seas can drown whole regions, leaving towns and farms beneath waves. Sand and silt cover the remains, coral grows upon walls, and soon the ruins are indistinguishable from reefs. What was once city becomes seabed. In 100,000 years, tectonic plates may carry it deep into earth, erasing it entirely. Erosion. Wind scrapes cliffs, rivers carve valleys, ice grinds mountains. Over long time, every surface is smoothed. Carvings fade, inscriptions vanish, towers crumble into rubble, rubble into sand. Even great works of our own, if left alone, would soften and scatter within a few tens of thousands of years. Time's patient hand leaves little untouched, small populations. If a civilization was limited in number, its traces would be fewer, easier to erase. A few villages scattered over valleys, a few fields cleared, a few tools crafted. Without massive cities or vast industries, their footprint could vanish almost entirely. A small, sustainable people could live and pass without leaving anything we would recognize as civilization at all. The recycling of Earth. The crust itself is restless. Land rises, folds, and sinks. Ocean floors are swallowed, mountains ground to plains, plains buried in floods. Over millions of years, nearly everything on the surface is destroyed or transformed. Only in rare pockets, caves, deserts, frozen ground, might traces endure. And even then, they may become unreadable, stones without context, artifacts mistaken for accidents of nature. When these processes combine, the erasure is complete. A people might live, build, thrive, and vanish, leaving only whispers, charcoal in soil, pollen in silt, a few curious stones on a hillside. To us, those whispers may look like nothing at all. Civilization might pass unnoticed, its story written only in absence, and so the thought lingers, if there were others before us, perhaps they did not leave monuments we could see. Perhaps their works were of wood and clay, their song sung to rivers, their memory carried only by wind. Time has had patience enough to erase them. We are left only with the silence, which is itself a kind of presence. The presence of possibility that in this silence, we learn humility. For we, too, will one day be erased. Our skyscrapers and machines, our books and records, our screens and wires, all will fade, just as others may have faded. Perhaps, far in the future, another people will stand where we once stood and wonder, were they the first, or were there others before? When we think of history, we often imagine it as a straight line, a march from past to present, from simplicity to complexity, from darkness to light. Yet the Earth's rhythm is seldom straight. It circles. It pulses. It breathes in cycles of growth and retreat, of flowering and fading, of building and forgetting. Civilizations, too, may not be exceptions to this pattern but part of it, rising like spring, ripening in summer, waning in autumn, resting in winter, and then beginning again. Nature teaches this quietly. Forests burn, yet from ash, green shoots emerge. Rivers flood, scatter silt, and then retreat, leaving fields more fertile than before. Ice advances across continents, grinding valleys, then melts, and meadows bloom. Seasons turn without hurry, without end. If civilizations are rooted in nature, as surely they must be, then perhaps they, too, follow such cycles. Even within our recorded history, the pattern is clear. The Sumerians rose with their canals and cities, only to falter as soil grew tired and rivers shifted. Egypt built pyramids and temples, then saw them wither while dynasties changed, renewed, and faded again. Greece flowered, declined, and left its seeds to Rome, which itself rose, shone, and fell. In Asia, dynasties grew strong, weakened, collapsed, and were replaced, each new line borrowing and reshaping what came before. The pattern is not unique to one place. It is universal. To rise, to endure, to wane, to pass, this is the quiet law of civilizations. Now stretch this pattern into deeper time. Imagine not centuries or millennia, but tens of thousands of years, even millions. What if there were civilizations before us, long before recorded history, that too followed this rhythm? What if they rose, flourished, and collapsed, not once but many times, each cycle erased by time's patient hand? Their ruins may lie beneath seas, their ashes scattered by wind, their stories dissolved into silence. Collapse need not be dramatic. Sometimes it is slow. A climate shifts, making harvests uncertain. Trade falters. Populations decline. Cities shrink, houses empty, streets fade back into soil. People move on, seeking gentler lands, leaving behind walls that crumble quietly. In 1,000 years, the city is meadow. In 10,000, forest. In 100,000, perhaps stone again. Collapse is not always fire. It is often silence, but after collapse, there is often renewal. New people come, new settlements rise, old stones are reused. Sometimes the new is stronger, wiser, and longer-lasting. Sometimes it, too, falls in its turn. The cycle is not despair. It is life's rhythm, always seeking balance, always returning in another form. If we imagine civilizations before us, we might imagine not a single grand empire but many cycles, some brief, some long, some fragile, some strong. Perhaps they rose in forgotten valleys, built with wood and clay, flourished for centuries, and then dissolved. Perhaps others followed, leaving only faint layers of charcoal, odd stones, or subtle patterns in soil. Each cycle fading, each cycle reborn, until only silence remains. Even now, we live within such cycles. We build, we expand, we change the earth. Yet we, too, may one day wane. Our cities may crumble, our records vanish, our memory fade. And perhaps, in a far future, another people will rise, wondering as we do if they are the first. The comfort lies in knowing that the cycle is natural. To create is natural. To collapse is natural. To rise again is natural. Civilizations are not permanent, but neither is their passing final. They are part of the Earth's breath, part of its turning seasons. And whether or not others came before, we walk within that same rhythm, our footsteps joining the quiet cadence of time. When we study our own history, we see a pattern of beginnings, scattered groups of foragers, the slow taming of fire, the shaping of tools, the planting of seeds, the raising of villages, the forming of cities. It is tempting to see this path as unique, a one-time journey written for humans alone. Yet if we ask gently, what if others once walked before us, then another question follows. Would their path have been the same as ours, or something entirely different? Our rise was tied to certain thresholds. Fire gave us warmth, light, and craft. Agriculture anchored us, letting families stay, grow, and plan beyond seasons. Metal opened new strength, writing opened memory, trade opened distance. Step by step, small discoveries stacked into something larger than survival, into culture, into civilization. If another species, another people, or another civilization once rose, they, too, would have needed thresholds. Perhaps not the same as ours, but moments of turning. Would they have discovered fire, or something else entirely? Would they have planted fields, or would their sustenance have come from rivers, reefs, or forests? Would their tools have been stone, or bone, or something we cannot now imagine? We often measure civilization by monuments, by walls and roads. But what if others measured theirs differently? By harmony with land, by rhythm with seasons, by songs and ceremonies rather than cities? If so, their memory would be harder to find. A people who lived lightly, who left forests standing and rivers clean, might vanish with little trace. Their culture carried only in myths that survived in later tongues, and yet, certain needs are universal. Warmth, food, shelter, companionship. To meet these needs is to invent. A net for fishing, a hearth for cooking, a roof against rain. Such things are born not of grandeur but of necessity. If others once rose, their lives too would have been shaped by these needs. They, too, would have crafted, sung, gathered, shared. The details may differ, but the heart would be familiar. Still, the differences are worth imagining. Perhaps their tools were not shaped from stone but from shells, bamboo, or fibers, none of which last long. Perhaps their homes were woven, their stories carved into living trees, their memory sung rather than written. If so, little would remain. We would walk their lands and see only forest, soil, and stone. Never guessing that once a civilization flourished here, our own rise has been tied to change, to reshaping landscapes. Mining stone, cutting forests, bending rivers. If others before us chose not to change so forcefully, if they lived within the cycles of land, then they may have endured quietly for millennia, then faded without leaving scars. Their story would be one of balance rather than conquest, of continuity rather than monuments. Comparing our rise to theirs reminds us of humility. We are not necessarily the pinnacle, but one expression among many possible. Civilization is not a single path but a garden of paths. Some are loud and enduring, others quiet and fleeting. We happen to take a path that carved deeply, leaving marks we can see. Others, if they came before, may have chosen softer roads, whose traces time has already folded into silence. And so, as we build our own world, it is worth remembering, others may have walked before, others may walk after. Our story is not the only possible story. It is simply ours, bright, brief, and fragile, like all the others the earth has seen. Long before writing, there were stories. Around fires, in caves, under stars, people wove words into patterns to explain the world, to remember, to pass down. Myths are more than entertainment. They are vessels of memory, carrying fragments of truth across generations. When history fails to leave stone or ink, sometimes it survives as tale. And so, if there were civilizations before us, perhaps their faintest traces still live not in ruins, but in myths whispered through time across the world. Many cultures tell of floods, great waters rising, covering lands, sweeping away cities. From Mesopotamia's epic of Utnapishtim to the Hebrew tale of Noah. From Indian legends of Manu to Native American stories of canoes atop mountains. The theme repeats, a world before washed away, a few survivors carried into a new age. Perhaps these are symbolic, metaphors of renewal. Yet they might also carry echoes of real floods, glacier melting, seas rising, rivers bursting their banks. In their rhythm, one hears the possibility of memory older than our written pages. There are also myths of golden ages, times when people lived in harmony, when life was easier, when the earth gave freely. Greek poets spoke of such an age before toil. In Hindu tradition, the Satya Yuga was a time of virtue and abundance. Norse tales remember ages before winter's harshness, before strife. These myths may simply be longings for a better past, but they may also preserve a sense that something was lost, that before our known histories lay worlds of another kind. Then there are the myths of great builders, giants who lifted stones with ease, gods who carved mountains, ancient peoples who raised monuments now weathered and broken. In the Americas, the Inca sometimes said their great walls were the work of earlier ones. In Ireland, dolmens were once thought to be the beds of fairies or the work of giants. Even the Egyptians looked upon their pyramids with awe, as though remembering not just their own hands but the possibility of older ones. Myths also carry the language of fire. Tales of cities consumed by flame, of divine punishment raining down, of lands turned to ash. Some speak of Sodom and Gomorrah, others of volcanic islands disappearing in smoke, still others of whole forests ignited by angered gods. Beneath the divine and the poetic, we may hear memories of eruptions, wildfires, disasters that reshape landscapes. But perhaps, too, there are echoes of civilizations undone by flame, whether by accident, war, or the earth itself. And then there are the stranger myths, islands that sink overnight, people who vanish, races of beings who lived before humankind but fell into ruin. Atlantis is the most famous, but not the only. Pacific peoples tell of lands that rose and sank. Australian Dreamtime stories speak of worlds before this one. African traditions remember earlier peoples replaced by newcomers. Myth, in its way, suggests layers. Civilizations stack like sediments. One fading as another begins. It is easy to dismiss myths as imagination, as fancy. Yet imagination often grows from soil of truth. A storm remembered becomes a tale of a flood. A volcanic eruption becomes a god's anger. An old ruin becomes a story of giants. If civilizations came before, their memory may not survive in stone, but in story. And even if they did not, the persistence of such myths tells us something profound, that humans sense the depth of time. And within that depth, they imagine companions, predecessors. Echoes.to listen to myths is to listen to the Earth's subconscious. They are dreams spoken aloud, shaped by fear, hope, memory, and imagination. They remind us that history is not only found in books and bones but also in voices that survive the silence. Whether true or not, myths keep alive the possibility that we are not the first, that others may have walked here, their footsteps softened into legend. Above us, the stars move with patient rhythm. The sun rises and sets, the moon swells and fades, constellations drift slowly across seasons. To us, these patterns are steady, yet over centuries they shift. The pole star changes, equinoxes wander, skies never remain quite the same. For countless generations, humans have lifted their eyes to these lights and found meaning. Temples, circles, and pyramids often bear the marks of this attention. Alignments that whisper of a dialogue between stone and sky. Consider Stonehenge, whose great trilithons greet the midsummer sunrise. Or the pyramids of Giza, aligned almost perfectly to cardinal points, their shafts pointing toward stars. In Central America, temples stand where shadows and light weave serpents on equinox days. In Asia, ancient observatories track the sun and moon with uncanny precision. Again and again, builders set stone in sympathy with sky, as though to root heaven's rhythm into earth. Why such effort? To know when to plant, when to harvest, when floods might come. To honor gods who lived in celestial palaces. To weave human life into cosmic order. But beneath these practical and spiritual reasons lies something else, the sense that the sky remembers. That if you anchor a stone to a sunrise, you create a bridge between fleeting human lives and the timeless heavens. Now imagine, If others came before us, might they too have built such bridges? Perhaps they raised circles of stone now buried, or carved grooves in hillsides now lost, or even built observatories of wood and clay long since erased. Perhaps their knowledge of stars was folded into myths we still tell. When we look at constellations, bears, hunters, serpents, birds, are we hearing only our own voices, or echoes of voices older still? Even in our own history, the sky is a mirror of memory. The Greeks inherited constellations from Babylonians, who in turn learned from older Mesopotamian watchers. Polynesian navigators carried star paths across oceans, songs memorizing the positions of rising and setting stars. In India, nakshatras, lunar mansions, measured time by the moon's journey through the heavens. Everywhere, sky was not background but companion. To map it was to map existence itself. Astronomers today can reverse the sky, winding back precession, tracing positions of stars thousands of years past. They find that alignments once perfect no longer match, yet in earlier skies they did. Temples, mounds, and monuments thus become time machines, revealing not only when they were built but also how carefully their makers watched. To think that others, perhaps far older than we imagine, might have done the same is not unreasonable. The stars, after all, were the same teachers then as now. The sky is generous but also elusive. Its patterns inspire, but they change, and over tens of thousands of years, they shift completely. Civilizations that measured them in deep past may be unrecognizable to us now. Their constellations may be forgotten, their meanings erased. Yet perhaps something lingers, in myths of hunters and serpents, in stories of gods born from constellations, in symbols scratched on stone. The dialogue between stone and sky is therefore both fragile and enduring. Fragile, because wood rots, clay crumbles, meanings fade. Enduring, because the sky itself is eternal in its motion. To set a stone against sunrise is to join a rhythm larger than any culture, larger than any age. And even if the builders are forgotten, the alignment remains, pointing to the heavens long after names and stories are gone so when we stand before old monuments and marvel at their starbound designs. We may also wonder, are we seeing only our ancestors' work? Or are we glimpsing echoes, patterns repeated across forgotten cycles of time? Stones raised by hands we no longer remember, eyes guided by skies we can no longer reconstruct? In silence, the stones still wait for the sun. In silence, the stars still turn. And between them, perhaps, lies memory far deeper than we yet know. Memory feels strong to us. We keep books, carve names in stone, tell stories across tables, teach children to remember. Yet in truth, memory is fragile. It does not take millions of years to lose a civilization. Sometimes, it takes only centuries. Sometimes, only decades. What we do not repeat, we forget. What we do not tend, we lose. Think of languages. Every year, tongues vanish, once spoken by families, villages, peoples. When the last speaker falls silent, so does a world of thought, a way of describing rivers, stars, kinship, dreams. Unless recorded, it is gone forever. Even great languages shift and drift until their earliest forms are unreadable. The words of Homer, of Confucius, of the Vedas, already they require scholars to interpret. In another 1,000 years, even more will fade. Think of libraries. Fire is their oldest enemy. The Library of Alexandria is remembered for its burning, but it was only one of many. Countless scrolls and codices have been lost, works of science, philosophy, poetry. A single torch, a single war, a single damp cellar is enough to erase centuries of knowledge. Even our modern stores, digital records, printed books, are vulnerable. Without care, paper yellows, ink fades, discs corrode. The memory of a people can vanish in less time than a tree grows. Think of objects. Pottery lasts, but wood splits, cloth rots, leather stiffens. A carved staff, a woven mat, a painted mask, these endure only in rare conditions, deserts, caves, frozen soils. Elsewhere, they dissolve back into earth. If whole cultures built with such materials, their traces would be faint indeed. Think of stories. Myths, legends, genealogies, these are carried by voices. But voices are mortal. If war scatters a people, if famine silences a generation, if conquerors forbid old tales, memory thins. Within 3 or 4 generations, vast histories can be reduced to fragments, then to silence. What was once fact becomes myth. What was once myth becomes forgotten. Even monuments, seemingly eternal, are not safe. Stones fall, inscriptions weather. A city left untended becomes rubble in a few centuries. Forests return, rivers change course, sand buries walls. By the time thousands of years have passed, what was once a proud capital may be only a mound in a field, mistaken for a hill. That if memory can fail so easily in a few centuries, what of thousands of years? What of millions? It is entirely possible for civilizations to vanish not in fire or flood, but in forgetting. To be lost not to catastrophe, but to time's gentle indifference. And so, when we ask whether others came before us, we must remember this fragility. Even if they did, their stories may not survive, their language may be gone, their works dissolved. They may have been erased not by disaster but by silence, yet there is a kind of beauty in this, too. Memory's fragility teaches us to listen more carefully, to preserve what we can, to honor what we inherit. It reminds us that nothing is guaranteed, that every song sung, every story told, every carving made is precious precisely because it can be lost. We, too, will one day be forgotten. Our languages will change, our books will crumble, our monuments will fall. Perhaps only faint traces will remain, a shard, a word, a myth. And perhaps that is enough. For memory is not only about permanence, it is about presence. To live, to create, to tell stories in this moment is itself an act of memory, even if it fades tomorrow. Before there were scribes, there were rivers. Before there were books, there were forests. Before the first tablet was pressed with symbols, the earth itself was already keeping record, though in a language slower than ours, written in soil, stone, and root. If civilizations rose before us, long before our pens and presses, perhaps their memory does not rest in libraries but in landscapes, rivers right in meanders. They shift course over centuries, abandoning old beds and carving new ones. In their bends, they leave oxbow lakes, crescent scars that linger like forgotten sentences. Buried in their silts lie pollen, charcoal, bones, even fragments of tools. Each flood lays a page of mud, sealing within it a moment of life. Long after people vanish, rivers remember, folding stories into their banks. Trees keep annals and rings. Each year, a circle, narrow in drought, wide in abundance. Fire leaves dark scars. Storms twist grain. Lightning etches spirals. A forest is thus an archive of centuries, thousands of voices rising together. To cut a trunk is to read history written in wood. Even when trees fall, their rings endure in stumps, driftwood, buried logs. If an old civilization once cleared forests, or burned them, or tended them, the memory may still be whispered in the rings of survivors. Mountains hold long memories. Strata stacked in cliffs reveal seas that came and went, deserts that shifted, forests that turned to stone. Fossils sleep there. Minerals crystallize into subtle records of pressure and heat. A mountain is a book written in deep time, every fold a line, every fault a punctuation. Civilizations may crumble, but the land beneath them is still inscribed with the story of their climate, their soil, their vanished rivers. Deserts are quiet archivists. Their sands hide, their dryness preserves. Footprints can last for thousands of years, etched by wind and sun. A hearth buried in dunes, a shard of pottery, a scrap of bone. Such things endure when moisture is absent. The desert does not forget quickly. It layers memory in drifts of silence. Ice keeps memories in bubbles. In glacier, snow compacts year after year, capturing air, dust, even faint traces of smoke. To drill into ice is to pull up an atmosphere from ages past, a frozen breath of the world. Fires lit 10,000 years ago may still linger as tiny flecks of soot. If a civilization once burned wood or fields, their echoes might be trapped in ice's pale blue walls. Soil remembers, too. Plowed fields, even when long abandoned, leave subtle lines, faint ridges that archaeologists call ghost fields. Charcoal in the earth speaks of fires. Unusual mixes of pollen speak of crops once grown. Soil is a quiet storyteller, holding on to hints of cultivation long after walls have fallen, and even the sea keeps minutes in shells. Corals grow rings like trees, recording seasons of warmth and storm. Shell beds shift in color and thickness, marking changes in water and life. To walk a shoreline and pick up a shell is to hold a page of the ocean's diary. Nature, then, is the first historian. Its records are not perfect. They are partial, patient, sometimes illegible. But they endure far beyond human writing. If civilizations came before us, their memory may not be carved in monuments but in these natural chronicles, rings, layers, sediments, scars. To read them requires not only science but imagination, the willingness to see time in every grain, every line, every ripple. Even now, as we build our own world, nature is recording us. Rivers carry our silt, glaciers catch our smoke, soils mark our fields, corals remember our warming seas. Someday, when our own records are gone, the earth will still speak of us in its quiet language. And perhaps, long after, another people will read it and wonder, as we do now, who came before? When we think of technology, we picture machines of steel and glass, engines roaring, lights glowing. But technology, at its root, is simply knowledge put to use, any craft, tool, or method that helps shape life. By this measure, technologies need not be massive or metallic. They can be subtle, quiet, made of perishable things. And if civilizations existed before us, their technologies may not have survived, not because they were weak, but because time is stronger. Consider wooden machines. We ourselves once built with wood, wheels, gears, frames, bridges. Left untended, wood rots quickly. Iron nails rust, ropes fray, leather straps weaken. Within a few centuries, a machine can vanish completely, leaving not a trace. If an earlier people built their tools and devices from wood, plant fibers, and bone, their ingenuity might already be erased, their inventions lost to the appetite of soil and rain. Think of woven works. Nets, sails, baskets, textiles. These are technologies as transformative as any engine. They allow travel, trade, storage, comfort. Yet cloth rarely survives except in the driest of caves or the coldest of tombs. A civilization of weavers could shape its whole world with threads and patterns, then vanish without leaving even a scrap for us to find. Consider organic chemistry. Dyes, medicines, glues, fermented foods, all are technologies of transformation. Yet they vanish quickly, leaving at best a faint residue in jars or soils. If others before us discovered powerful treatments, complex brews, or subtle glazes, those discoveries may be lost entirely. Their evidence washed away in rain or folded into earth. There are also technologies of sound. Songs, chants, rhythms that measured time, navigated seas, carried memory. A tune can guide a boat across an ocean if taught generation to generation. A rhythm can mark the seasons. A story can encode farming knowledge. Oral technologies are real, but fragile. Without voices, they vanish into silence. If a civilization depended more on sound than stone, little would remain for us to see. Even fire itself is a kind of technology. Control of heat allowed pottery, cooking, metallurgy. Yet unless fire leaves a hearth ringed with stone or a scattering of charcoal sealed in soil, its record is faint. A civilization might have mastered kilns, furnaces, or even delicate forms of energy we cannot imagine, and yet leave only thin seams of soot in a forgotten layer of ground. We imagine metal as lasting, but even metal decays. Bronze turns green and brittle, iron rusts into dust. Gold and platinum endure, but they are rare, unlikely to be used widely. A civilization of bronze may leave only corroded flecks after 10,000 years. After 1,000,000, even those flecks may be gone. Think, too, of architecture of earth. Mounds, terraces, canals. Built without stone blocks or baked bricks, these can be erased by erosion, floods, and time. Many such works of our own ancestors were nearly invisible until aerial views and satellites revealed them. If older civilizations shaped land subtly, their works may still be hidden, mistaken for hills, ridges, or natural valleys, and then there are technologies we cannot yet imagine. If others before us learn things we have not, ways of using magnetism, resonance, growth of plants, or shaping of materials unknown to us, would we even recognize their traces? A perfect composting system might leave no waste. A system of energy that leaves no residue might disappear completely. An architecture woven of living trees might fall and rot, leaving only soil richer than before. Technology, then, is not always stone and steel. It can be fleeting, delicate, made of fibers, words, or heat. It can live in memory rather than matter. And so the absence of evidence does not mean absence of invention. It may mean only that time has done its work, returning crafts to dust and silence. We look for great machines in stone and metal. But perhaps the most powerful technologies are those that vanish completely, leaving no scars. Perhaps that is why we struggle to find traces of civilizations that might have come before, because their works, being clever, left the earth much as they found it. The earth is not still. It breathes, it folds, it grinds, it melts, it builds anew. To live upon it is to live upon a surface that is always in motion, though its movements are often too slow for us to see. Mountains rise, then wear away. Seas open, then close. Continents drift like rafts across invisible tides of stone. In this constant recycling, memory itself is reused. What once was surface becomes depth. What once was depth becomes surface. If civilizations came before us, they may already have been folded back into Earth's endless cycle. The crust is restless. At mid-ocean ridges, new rock is born from fire, spreading the seafloor like ribbons. At trenches, old crust dives into the mantle, carrying with it sediments, fossils, even cities if they ever stood nearby. The floor of the ocean is rarely older than 200 million years, young by Earth standards. Anything older is gone, consumed by the planet's own hunger. Mountains are temporary. They look eternal, yet they are not. The Himalayas, tallest of all, are mere infants in geologic time. Erosion works constantly. Rain, wind, ice, rivers, each grain of sand a line in the story of a mountain's fall. Given millions of years, even the mightiest ranges are worn to plains. If a city once stood upon a ridge, its stones may already have become sand, its foundations scattered down rivers, its memory buried in sediments far away. Volcanoes rewrite the land. An eruption can bury valleys under ash, melt cities into glass, or build new mountains overnight. Yet over centuries, those same deposits weather into fertile soils. What was once ruin becomes field. What was once catastrophe becomes renewal. The evidence of what lay beneath is erased. Hidden beneath new growth, rivers carry everything. They gather soil from mountains, wood from forests, ash from fires. They carry these fragments to deltas, where they spread in broad fans, or to oceans, where currents scatter them farther. A single river can erase a settlement in a season of flood. In thousands of years, even foundations can be scoured away, replaced with fertile fields or shifting sands. Ice grinds mercilessly. Glacier carve valleys, flatten hills, drag boulders across continents. Beneath their weight, forests vanish, rivers are rearranged, soils are scraped clean. When the ice retreats, new lakes sparkle in hollows, new plains stretch wide. But whatever lay beneath, villages, forests, even mountains, has been erased, reduced to rubble and dust. Wind is patient. Grain by grain, it scours stone, carries dust across oceans, builds dunes, buries valleys. A wall left to the desert may vanish within centuries. Its bricks turn to sand, its outlines erased. Wind does not hurry, yet it never rests. Even the chemistry of the earth recycles. Bones dissolve, shells recrystallize, wood becomes coal, coal becomes graphite. Graphite may vanish into diamond or be carried back into mantle fire. Nothing stays as it was. Everything transforms. The earth does not keep. It remakes, and so, if civilizations once lived in ages long before ours, Their traces may have been folded into mountains, melted into magma, ground into sand, carried by rivers, erased by glacier. Their memory may still be here, but in another form, a mineral, a sediment, a layer of clay. We may walk upon their remnants daily, never knowing. This constant recycling is humbling. We like to think of permanence, of pyramids lasting forever, of books enduring, of cities standing eternal. But the earth does not promise permanence. It promises change. It promises that all things, given time, will be returned to the cycle and reshaped, and yet, there is peace in this, too. For recycling is not destruction. It is transformation. What was once lost becomes part of something new. Civilizations before us, if they existed, may have been erased, but their matter remains, perhaps in the soil that grows forests, in the sand that builds coasts, in the clay that we ourselves shape into bricks. In that sense, they are not gone. They are part of the living earth, part of US.TOC Earth's recycling not as loss but as renewal is to see our own place differently. We, too, will return to this cycle. Our monuments, our machines, our bones will one day be sand, soil, stone. And perhaps, far in the future, others will walk upon them, wondering, as we do now, who came before. When we search for the past, we look for ruins, for walls, for monuments that rise above the earth. But sometimes the past survives in places far smaller, in grains of dust, in molecules, in the delicate chemistry of soil. If civilizations existed before us, perhaps their most enduring legacy is not something we can see with the eye, but something we must sense with instruments. Subtle as whispers on the wind, microscopic fossils tell stories of life. Tiny shells of foraminifera, diatoms, carcoliths, each less than a pinprick, settle in sediments, recording oceans and climates. In the same way, a single grain of charcoal from an ancient hearth, invisible to us, may linger in soil for tens of thousands of years. When scientists examine cores of mud or ice, they sometimes find such flecks, hints of fire, smoke, or cultivation. To us, they may look like chance, but perhaps they are the faintest breath of lives long gone. Chemical signatures endure. Farming leaves traces in nitrogen and carbon, subtle shifts in soil that reveal fields once tilled, crops once planted. Smelting leaves residues of metals, lead, copper, iron, scattered in rivers or buried in lakes. Fires that burn forests leave black layers rich in carbon. Even after wood and stone have vanished, the chemistry remains, a fingerprint too small to see but written clearly in the language of isotopes. Pollen grains survive. Each plant makes them in abundance, and each grain has its own shape, its own tiny architecture. In layers of soil and sediment, pollen drifts down year after year, creating an invisible record of landscapes. A sudden abundance of wheat pollen, or maize, or rice, may tell of fields tended by hands. A sudden absence of trees may speak of forests cut or burned. These changes are not visible to us when we walk the land, but in microscopes, they appear like quiet maps of forgotten activity. Invisible scars mark landscapes. A field once plowed may look like a meadow today, but its soil may still show different compaction, different chemistry, different layers. A hearth long gone may still leave a shadow of warmth in the ground, detectable only with sensitive tools. Even paths walked by countless feet can alter soil in ways that endure long after the feet are gone. Keeps faint memories, too. Bubbles trapped in ice hold ancient atmospheres, air breathed thousands of years ago. Within them are traces of carbon, methane, sulfur, tiny fragments of dust. Fires, industries, even the breath of countless creatures can linger here. If civilizations once rose and burned fuel, their smoke may still be held in these bubbles, tiny witnesses frozen in time, and yet, such traces are fragile. They can be erased by floods, by glacier, by heat and pressure. Many survive only in rare places, lakes without disturbance, caves sealed against air, ice locked in cold. Most of Earth's surface rewrites itself too quickly for small traces to last. That is why, when we look for the deep past, we must search carefully, patiently, listening not for shouts but for murmurs. To imagine traces too small to see is to admit that certainty may never be ours. Civilizations may have come and gone, leaving nothing but a faint chemical spike, a scattering of microscopic grains, a layer of soot we mistake for lightning's work. The evidence may be there, but hidden, folded into the Earth's quiet processes, and perhaps this is fitting. For memory, like life, is delicate. What lasts is not always what was greatest, but what was most fortunate, what happened to fall in the right place, at the right moment, to be preserved. If others came before, their grandest works may be gone, but their smallest traces may still rest beneath our feet, unseen, waiting. When we picture civilization, we think of stone and brick, of towers and monuments. We imagine roads stretching like veins across continents, great fires forging metals, armies marching, markets bustling. Civilization, to us, is weighty, something that leaves scars upon the earth. But what if there were civilizations whose greatest strength was their silence? What if their choice was not to leave marks, but to live so gently that time itself could not tell they were there? Such people might have shaped their world from perishable things. Wood for homes, reeds for walls, leaves for roofs, clay for pots that returned to soil, fibers for baskets that crumbled into dust. Their monuments could have been gardens, groves of trees planted in patterns, rivers channeled with woven mats, paths pressed gently into grass. When they left, wind and rain would undo their work within a season. Forests would return, dunes would drift, rivers would change course. To us, it would seem as though nothing had ever been. Their technologies might have been quiet ones, medicine from herbs, dyes from flowers, fire from friction, music from air and string. They might have woven fabrics finer than any we know, fermented foods with knowledge now lost, sung maps of land and sea, remembered history in rhythm and dance. Yet such knowledge, carried in memory and practice, would vanish when the voices ceased. Nothing solid would remain but the soil enriched by their presence. Perhaps their philosophy, too, was silence. To live without conquest, without excess, without the need to carve mountains or mine deep into earth. A people who found contentment in balance rather than growth, who measured their wealth in harmony, not monuments. They may have been strong in spirit, wise in ways we no longer recognize, yet their legacy would be invisible to us. It is tempting to think civilization must mean permanence, but permanence is an illusion. Even our strongest works crumble. A silent civilization may have understood this better than we do, that to live is not to dominate but to pass lightly, to leave room for what comes after. Their memory would be carried not in stone but in the living earth, in rivers still clear, in forests still whole, in skies unmarked by smoke. If they existed, how would we ever know? A faint layer of pollen showing cultivated fields, a seam of charcoal from controlled fires, a pattern of trees growing where once they were planted in rows. These are whispers so faint we might mistake them for chance. And yet, they could be the only signatures of civilizations that lived with such gentleness that the earth hardly noticed their passing. There is a quiet nobility in this thought. For while our own age is heavy with marks, mines, plastics, concrete, smoke, these imagined civilizations remind us of another path. A path where life and land were entwined, where memory was carried in song, where disappearance was not failure but fulfillment. To vanish without a trace is, in a way, the ultimate harmony with nature, and perhaps that is why we struggle to find evidence of those who may have come before, because the ones who lived most wisely left the least behind. Their silence was not emptiness but choice. Their absence in our record may be the strongest sign of their presence. We often think of forgetting as failure, as something to resist. We keep records, carve stones, write books, build monuments, all in the hope that memory will last. Yet the earth does not keep memory in this way. It remembers differently, and it forgets freely. In its forgetting, there is no malice, only rhythm. To live upon the earth is to live within a cycle of remembering and erasing, of making and unmaking. Forgetting begins with change. A storm topples a roof, a flood scatters seeds, a fire turns wood to ash. What once seemed solid dissolves into fragments. Soon, grass creeps into cracks, roots pry open walls, rivers change course. Within a few seasons, what was once a home or a field becomes something else, a ruin, a mound, a meadow. Memory fades into the soil, visible only to those who look closely over longer spans. Forgetting deepens. Forests spread over valleys where people once walked. Deserts drift across plains where cities once stood. Ice sheets grind over mountains, carrying all before them. What is left behind is not evidence of lives but silence. The earth does not cling to detail. It smooths, it balances, it begins anew. Even stone, which feels eternal, is slowly forgotten. Inscriptions weather into shadows, pillars crumble into rubble, rubble turns to sand. Time is patient, and with patience, it erases even the greatest of works. Whole civilizations can vanish into the quiet, leaving no trace but faint patterns in soil, faint whispers in myth. Yet this forgetting is not emptiness. It is transformation. The earth forgets not to discard, but to renew. The wood of fallen beams becomes soil that feeds trees. The ash of burned cities enriches rivers that feed fields. The stone of toppled monuments becomes sand that builds coasts. Forgetting is not destruction but continuation, the folding of one story into another, and perhaps, if there were civilizations before us, they have already been forgotten in this way. Not lost, but transformed. Their cities may now be forests, their hearths rivers, their walls mountains of sand. Their memory may survive not in monuments but in the richness of the land itself. We may walk unknowingly through their legacy, breathing the air their fires once touched, drinking water shaped by their fields. There is a lesson in this. We strive for permanence, but permanence is not the way of the earth. What endures is not walls or words, but the rhythm of life continuing. Forgetting is not absence, it is space for something new. If we are forgotten one day, it will not be tragedy. It will be the earth doing what it has always done, turning, renewing, balancing, beginning again. So when the earth forgets, we can find peace. For in forgetting, it also carries us forward. We become part of soil, of river, of air, of stone. Our memory may fade, but our presence remains in the cycle. And in this way, forgetting is not an ending, but a gentle folding into the endless fabric of time. The earth forgets, but the sky remembers differently. Above us, stars move in slow arcs, their pattern shifting only over thousands of years. To sailors and farmers, to storytellers and priests, the stars have always been guides. They mark seasons, trace calendars, shape myths. They are steady, distant, patient. If civilizations came before us, perhaps some trace of their presence lingers not in soil or stone, but in the sky itself. Constellations are one form of memory. Shapes drawn between stars, hunters, serpents, birds, are not inherent. They are chosen. The constellations we know today are inherited from cultures long past. Yet before those, there were others, now forgotten. If civilizations older still once named the stars, their patterns may be lost to us, but perhaps faint echoes survive in myths shared across continents. A hunter in the sky here, a serpent there, a bird spanning worlds. Different peoples, distant lands, yet similar figures. Coincidence, or inheritance from voices older than we can trace. Astronomical alignments also whisper of memory. When ancient monuments align to solstices or equinoxes, they bind earth to sky. Yet precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, shifts the heavens over millennia. What once aligned perfectly may no longer do so. By tracing these changes backward, astronomers can sometimes find the exact centuries when builders watched a star rise just so, or when the sun set in a particular notch of stone. These alignments are a dialogue across time. If civilizations before us made similar marks, they may now lie buried, waiting for rediscovery. Records in the sky are not only visual. The Earth's atmosphere catches dust, meteors, even signals from beyond. A civilization advanced enough to shape light, beacons, reflections, fires great enough to reach upward, might leave traces faint but real. Modern astronomers scan for unusual pulses of light, odd chemical signatures in starlight, hints of patterns. Most are natural, but the very act of looking reminds us that civilizations leave marks not only on their planets but also in the heavens above. Myths often speak of people who came from the stars, or who returned to them. In Polynesian stories, ancestors sail among constellations. In Mesopotamian tales, gods descend on beams of light. In the Americas, some myths speak of sky people who taught, then vanished. Whether these are metaphors, dreams, or faint memories, they show how deeply humanity links its story to the stars. Perhaps earlier peoples did the same, binding their memory into myths that carried forward long after their monuments were gone. Even if no earlier civilizations ever lived, the stars still offer perspective. They remind us that our time is brief. The light we see tonight left its stars centuries or millennia ago. We, too, are but a moment in that long journey. If others came before us, their age may be gone, their memory erased, but the stars that shone upon them are the same stars that shine upon us now. In this way, the sky is a bridge, a link not of monuments or artifacts, but of shared light, and perhaps this is the most enduring sign of all, not ruins or artifacts, but the quiet rhythm of stars themselves. They need no builders, no architects. They endure. Civilizations may rise and fall, but the stars remain, patient witnesses to all that passes beneath them. When we open a book and find missing pages, our attention lingers on the gaps. What was written there? What story was interrupted? The Earth's history is like such a book, with long passages intact and others torn away. Between the layers of fossils, between the seams of sediment, there are silences, ages for which little or nothing is preserved. These are the Earth's unwritten chapters, the layers of silence. Silence does not mean nothing happened. It means the record has not been kept. Floods erased it, erosion swept it, fire consumed it, or tectonic plates buried it deep. In those silences, anything might have lived: forests, animals, people, even civilizations. The Earth does not say. It simply turns the page, leaving us to wonder. Even in human history, silence abounds. We know fragments of the Sumerians, the Egyptians, the Maya, but between them are forgotten cultures, their names lost, their languages vanished. Archaeologists find traces, pottery shards, soil marks, faint mounds, but the voices are gone. Multiply that by millions of years, and the silences deepen until imagination is the only bridge. Silence also has texture. Some layers of silence are short, mere centuries where little was recorded. Others are vast, stretching millions of years. They are like valleys between peaks of knowledge. We stand on one mountain of certainty, see another across the gulf, but the land between is shrouded in mist. What lived there, what rose and fell, remains unspoken, yet silence is not emptiness. It is possibility. It invites us to imagine, to wonder, to dream. Perhaps that is why myths are so powerful. They step into silence and fill it with story. Perhaps that is why we speculate about civilizations before us, because silence itself suggests there could have been more than we know. Even in our own age, silence grows quickly. A century of neglect can erase a city. A few generations of forgetting can erase a language. 1,000 years of weather can erase a monument. If this is true for us, how much more so for ages that lie millions of years behind? Their memory, if any existed, may now be nothing but silence, but silence is not cruel. It is gentle. It does not declare that something was not. It simply does not speak. And in that quiet, we are free to wonder, to imagine civilizations of wood and song, of gardens and rivers, of balance and silence themselves. Civilizations that rose, thrived, and vanished into the Earth's long memory without leaving scars. The layers of silence are thus part of the record. They remind us that history is not only what is written, but also what is missing. They teach us that forgetting is as natural as remembering. And they invite us to rest, knowing that not all must be known, not all must be proven. Some stories live best as whispers, carried softly through silence. Civilizations rise, flourish, and fall. Their monuments crumble, their languages fade, their stories dissolve into silence. Yet even as time erases, certain things endure, things not bound to stone or parchment, but to the deeper rhythms of the world. To wonder if we are the first is also to ask, what endures beyond time, no matter who has walked before? Patterns endure. Rivers carve valleys, the sun sets in the west, the moon swells and fades. These rhythms have guided life for millions of years. A civilization may vanish, but the tides continue, the constellations wheel, the seasons turn. Anyone who comes after can look to these same patterns and find the same comfort, the same guidance, the same sense of order. Ideas endure, though not always in words. Fire is an idea, to keep warmth, to cook, to harden clay. The plough is an idea, to shape soil into food. Music is an idea, to make time audible. Even if earlier civilizations lived and died, their ideas may have been rediscovered, drawn again from the same needs. Perhaps we did not invent fire, but rediscovered it. Perhaps we did not first plant fields, but repeated an older experiment. Civilization itself may be less invention than memory, rising again in different forms. Stories endure in shape, if not in detail. Floods, golden ages, heroes, giants, gods who walk among us. These tales repeat across cultures, across continents. The details differ, but the shapes remain. If civilizations before us told stories, perhaps fragments still survive in our myths, changed like pebbles rolled by a river, their edges worn but their forms still familiar. Beauty endures. The desire to decorate, to sing, to mark surfaces with patterns, to shape sound into harmony, these are constants of life. Even if no objects survive, the impulse itself remains. The first people sang, and so did we. If others came before, they likely did too. Beauty may not leave fossils, yet it endures as surely as stone. The earth itself endures. Continents drift, mountains rise and fall, oceans open and close, but the planet remains. Its cycles, its transformations, its patience, these endure. Civilizations are brief sparks compared to its vastness, yet each spark adds to the glow of its long history, and beyond Earth, the stars endure. Long after cities crumble, long after books are gone, the light of stars continues. The same stars we see now once shone upon ancient forests, upon dinosaurs, upon seas filled with creatures long extinct. If civilizations came before us, the stars would have shone upon them too. They are the great witnesses, constant above the changing world. So what endures beyond time? Not walls, not words, not even names. What endures are patterns, ideas, beauty, cycles. What endures is the earth itself, the stars above, and the quiet rhythm of life finding ways to begin again. That if we are the first civilization, then we, too, are part of this endurance. If we are not, then we share in something larger, the unbroken thread of existence that binds all who have ever lived, remembered, or forgotten. And that, perhaps, is what truly lasts, connection, woven through time, carried not in monuments but in being itself. When the questions are asked, when the stories are told, when the ruins are walked and the myths retold, what remains is silence. The earth, vast and patient, does not hurry to answer. It holds its secrets in stone, in sand, in ocean and ice. If there were civilizations before us, their memory is scattered now. Charcoal flecks in soil, pollen in mud, myths in song, whispers in the stars. Nothing certain, only possibilities. And in that uncertainty, there is peace that we have drifted through oceans and deserts, through myths and stones, through fire, silence, and stars. Again and again, we have seen how fragile memory is. Wood rots, cloth fades, stone crumbles, even mountains wear away. The earth recycles, renews, forgets. And yet, within this forgetting, there is no cruelty. The planet does not destroy. It transforms. What was once city becomes soil. What was once story becomes myth. What was once life becomes part of the next life. The long quiet is not empty. It is full of patience, full of the rhythm of the world. Rivers still flow, forests still grow, stars still turn. Civilizations may rise and fall, but life continues, and the earth carries on. In this way, even forgetting is a form of continuity. What disappears in one form reappears in another, part of the unbroken thread of existence. Perhaps we are the first civilization. Perhaps we are not. Perhaps there were others, silent, gentle, lost to time. We cannot know for certain. But what we can know is that our time, too, will pass. Our cities will crumble, our languages fade, our records dissolve. One day, we will join the silence. And that is not sorrow, but belonging. To be folded into the long quiet is to take our place in the great rhythm of the earth. Today, as you listen, as your eyes grow heavy, let this thought be a comfort. Nothing is truly lost. All that has been becomes part of what is. The earth carries everything forward, even if it forgets the details. Civilizations may vanish, but their presence lingers in soil, in rivers, in stars. The long quiet is not the end. It is the space where everything rests, ready to rise again in another form. So rest now, too. Let the quiet carry you. The earth has always turned, the stars have always watched, and time has always renewed. Whatever came before us, whatever will come after, we are here now, part of the same endless story. And in that story, the long quiet waits gently, not as loss, but as peace. When we speak of history, we often think of centuries and millennia. We think of kingdoms and empires, of dynasties rising and falling, of ships sailing, and of cities built stone upon stone. But Earth's true history stretches far beyond those markers, into expanses so wide that the whole of human existence seems like a brief candle flickering against the immensity of night. Before humans, before the first hunter lit a fire or carved a tool, the Earth had already lived countless ages. It had watched mountains rise and crumble, seas advance and retreat, continents drift and collide. Its silence stretched across billions of years, holding secrets older than any word, older than any story. Scientists measure this vastness in epochs and eons. The Precambrian, stretching from Earth's birth until the rise of complex life, lasted 4 billion years, a length of time beyond human comprehension. Within that silence, volcanoes roared, oceans boiled, and the planet cooled. Life began not as creatures we would recognize, but as single cells floating in primeval waters. If civilizations had existed in those early days, their traces would be buried deeper than the oldest rocks we now know, ground into the earth itself by fire and time. To sit quietly with this thought is to feel humility. We measure our own span, perhaps 70 or 80 years, a century if we are fortunate, and yet, before us, time stretched longer than language can hold. Entire continents formed, forests grew and vanished, oceans rose and swallowed valleys. If a civilization had bloomed during those deep ages, it would now be as silent as the stones beneath our feet. Consider the dinosaurs, who walked the earth for more than 160 million years. In comparison, our own recorded history barely stretches past 5,000. We imagine ourselves as permanent, as lasting, yet in the mirror of deep time, we are brief. The possibility that something else might have risen and fallen in the forgotten folds of prehistory does not seem impossible. It seems almost natural. For why should humanity alone carry the burden of being the first and only? The earth is patient, and it has had time enough for many stories, yet silence is the great eraser. The crust of the earth moves, mountains grind against one another, rivers carve valleys, glaciers scrape plains clean. What might have been built long ago could be lost under oceans, ground into dust, buried miles beneath layers of stone. We search the fossil record, the strata of rocks, the patterns of ancient minerals, but we find only hints of life as we know it. Still, as we gaze upon strange formations, unusual artifacts, or myths repeated across cultures, the question lingers: could some of these be faint echoes of civilizations long gone? The silence of deep time does not give answers, it only invites wonder. It reminds us that we are small, temporary, one chapter in a book with countless missing pages. Yet there is comfort in that thought, too. For if civilizations have come before us and vanished, and if others may come after us, then humanity is part of a greater rhythm, one of creation, endurance, and return. So we begin this journey not with certainty, but with humility. We stand at the edge of deep time, listening to its silence, and we allow ourselves to wonder, what if? When we walk upon the earth, we see mountains, rivers, deserts, and seas as though they have always been here. A mountain seems eternal, a river unchanging, a desert endless. Yet Earth is a restless planet. Its face is not fixed but constantly shifting, reshaping itself in slow, powerful silence. Continents drift like rafts across oceans of stone. Mountains rise where seas once lay. Forests vanish, deserts bloom, glacier-grown valleys, and volcanoes bury lands beneath fire. What we call nature is in truth an endless process of erasure and renewal, though if civilizations once lived here before us, the earth itself may have hidden them. Entire landscapes can vanish under layers of sediment or disappear beneath oceans. The very stones we walk upon today may cover older worlds, forgotten ages sealed in silence. Think of the great tectonic plates, giant slabs of the planet's crust moving slowly over millions of years. They collide, pushing up mountains like the Himalayas. They separate, tearing open oceans. They slide, carrying continents across latitudes. In this restless dance, whatever once stood upon them, forests, rivers, or perhaps even cities, was carried down into the deep earth, folded into stone, consumed by fire. Erosion works as steadily as time itself. Rain falls, rivers carve, winds scrape, ice shatters. Over thousands and millions of years, mountains are worn into hills, hills into plains, plains into dust. If a monument had stood 1,000,000 years ago, how much of it would remain? Even stone weathers, crumbles, and returns to sand. Consider how the great pyramids of Egypt, only a few thousand years old, are already scarred by wind and sun. Now imagine monuments 100,000 years old. Would we even recognize their ruins? Imagine 1,000,000 years. Would anything remain at all? The sea, too, is a master of forgetting. Oceans rise and fall with ice ages, swallowing coastlines and exposing new lands. Much of human civilization has always been drawn to the sea, yet rising waters hide ancient shores. Beneath waves lie cities and villages, harbors and fields, lost not only to time but to depth. Divers sometimes find ruins beneath shallow seas, reminders that the shore we walk today was once farmland, forest, or home. If humans leave such traces in a few thousand years, might the ocean floors hold traces of others, erased by far greater spans of time? We know of mass extinctions, the Permian, the Cretaceous, the great die-offs where much of life vanished. But what if among those vanished forms were not only animals, but cultures? What if, in the forgotten ages, there were beings who crafted tools, built homes, raised families, and then, in catastrophe, were swept away? Their bones and works might be indistinguishable now from stone, their histories reduced to whispers in the fossil record. Even myths seem to recall forgotten ages. Floods that washed away worlds. Fires that consumed whole peoples. Golden ages lost beneath time's slow river. These tales appear across continents, carried in the voices of cultures who never met, who never shared lands, yet who tell stories of great worlds destroyed. Are they only metaphors, or memories of ages so old they lie beyond history's reach? The Earth's forgotten ages are not gone, they are simply hidden. Beneath our feet lie layers upon layers of past landscapes, pressed into rock, buried in silence. The continents we see are palimpsests, written upon again and again, each age erasing what came before. In those erasures may lie entire chapters of existence that we will never read. To consider forgotten ages is to accept that what we see is not the whole. It is a fragment, a thin surface of a book too vast to open all at once. Beneath lies mystery, a reminder that the earth keeps its secrets, holding them quietly in stone, in ocean, in silence. And so we ask again, softly, without urgency, what if? The ocean has always been both a giver and a taker. It feeds, it carries, it cools, it shapes. Yet it also claims. Shorelines shift with the ages, swallowed when waters rise, exposed again when ice retreats. For as long as humans have lived, we have gathered near coasts, drawn to the sea's bounty. And so it is natural to imagine that if civilizations existed before us, they too may have built their homes by the water, only for the sea to reclaim them in silence. The ocean is vast and deep, covering more than 2/3 of our planet. Its floor is largely uncharted, its valleys deeper than mountains are tall. What lies beneath its waves is still a mystery. We know of shipwrecks, of drowned cities near shores, of harbors lost to storms. But what of the lands that once lay dry, where rivers flowed and forests grew? During the last ice age, sea levels were hundreds of feet lower, exposing vast stretches of land now buried. Whole coastlines are gone, entire valleys drowned, perhaps with stories that have been washed away. Consider Doggerland, once a fertile plain connecting Britain to Europe. For thousands of years, people lived there, hunting, fishing, and raising families. When the seas rose, it vanished, leaving only fragments buried beneath mud. Now fishermen dredge bones and tools from the North Sea, reminders of a land once alive. If such traces can be found from a few thousand years ago, what of coastlines from 100,000, or 1,000,000, or 10 million years past? What of civilizations that might have risen along those shores, their stones toppled and scattered, their memory dissolved into salt water? The ocean preserves and erases in equal measure. In its depths, oxygen is scarce, light does not reach, and time slows. Ancient shipwrecks rest intact on seabeds, their wood preserved in silence. Yet waves near the surface grind cliffs, scatter stones, and carry sands across continents. If cities once stood by ancient seas, storms and tides could have erased them completely, leaving only the faintest marks hidden deep below. Myths across the world whisper of floods and drowned worlds. Atlantis is the most famous, a city said to have sunk beneath the sea. But there are many others. In Mesopotamia, tales of floods wiping clean the earth. In India, stories of great cities consumed by waves. In the Americas, legends of islands swallowed by storms. These stories may be metaphors, but they may also carry fragments of memory, passed down across generations, retelling what the sea had taken. The ocean keeps its secrets well. It is difficult to search, harder still to dig. Technology has only begun to map the seabed, and most of it remains hidden, as though the earth prefers to guard its past. If civilizations had risen along ancient coasts, we may never know. Their walls and towers might rest miles beneath waves, their fields turned to silt, their fires long extinguished, yet there is a kind of comfort in this mystery. The ocean reminds us that not all can be known, not all must be measured or mapped. Some truths may lie forever beyond reach, resting in silence beneath blue waters. In its depths, the earth carries memory, not in books or stones we can read, but in secrets that remain, waiting quietly in darkness, and as we listen to the ocean's endless rhythm, the waves rising, falling, whispering upon the shore, we can imagine those lost coasts. Not to prove, not to claim, but simply to wonder, what if, beneath the sea, there were once worlds like ours?